So this was an example of way in which we use sports diplomacy to help improve literacy in Papua New Guinea. So you may have seen in the video the children, because they enjoy playing sports so much, in this case it was rugby league, because they enjoy playing sports, they're actually encouraged to stay at school so they can play sport. And then by using rugby league or other sports, this particular case was rugby league, but by using other sports as well, we can create learning materials that grab their interest. So rather than focusing on dry topics, the maths book might have them working out how to work out the scorecard in a game, for example, adding up the scores. For example, there's lots of different ways that sports can be incorporated into the educational materials. And this particular initiative, as I said, it's had great success in improving the literacy amongst school children in Papua New Guinea. So we're looking forward once again to developing this program further in coming years. I've just introduced to you three examples of Australian sports diplomacy to date. There's many, many more, but that's just to give you a bit of a taste, a bit of a flavour of the ways in which the Australian government has been looking to develop cooperation and collaboration partnerships with neighbouring countries through the vehicle of sports and sports cooperation. So that's what sports diplomacy is all about. I'll now briefly like to introduce our future plans for sports diplomacy. And this is what was launched last year by the Australian government. It's called Australia Sports Diplomacy 2030. So we've very much seen that rather than having a number of different initiatives, they need to be combined in a singular overriding strategy. So our approach to sports diplomacy going forward is looking to be more strategic, more targeted. So that's why we've developed this particular sports diplomacy strategy for 2030. Okay, so the objective or the focus of our strategy is obviously to empower Australian sport to represent Australia globally. We've come to realise that sports and our athletes are very important ambassadors for Australia. So in a diplomatic sense as well, they play an important role in projecting Australian values, Australian identity. So helping them to achieve that to represent Australia on the global stage is a key objective. In addition, we're also looking to strengthen our linkages with our neighbours. And that's, as I mentioned before, we have a particular focus on the Pacific, but it also extends beyond the Pacific into Asia. So I didn't introduce any of the previous examples. I didn't introduce collaborations with a number of Asian countries, but there's certainly been a considerable amount of programs that have used sports diplomacy to date. The third goal of our sports diplomacy strategy is to maximise trade, tourism and investment opportunities. So increasingly, sports is being realised that it's not just the activity itself, but also a number of associated activities that come along with that sport. And that includes tourism, investment and trade opportunities. There's many ways in which through sports and sports collaboration we can build better business connections between Australian and other countries around the region. And finally, the fourth objective is to strengthen communities in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. So what this means is that the strength, the stability of our regional partners is very important to Australia, and we see that sport can help play an important role in building, in strengthening that resilience. So I mentioned before that often in communities that face discrimination, where there's social disadvantage, sport can actually be a good way to help encourage people to participate, to develop self-esteem, to develop leadership skills, and then these people then go on to become leaders in their own community. That helps to strengthen that community and build links not only with that community but with broader communities in the country or with other countries around the world. So I'll just briefly now explain what I mean by each of these different goals. So when we talk about empowering Australian sport to represent Australia globally, what we mean is that we're looking to improve our sports leaders' knowledge, skills and connections to be able to represent Australia on a global stage. So we know that many of our people working in the sports industry are developing leadership skills, and then these people then go on to not only represent Australia in their own sports, but also could be in the broader community, could be in government or in other business or in other organisations. So all of the skills which they've developed through sports are able to then help them enhance and represent Australia better on the global stage. The next point is that through sport, we're looking to promote Australia as a brand and to build on our global reputation. Australia has a very good reputation in sport. We perform very well in both in things like the Olympic Games, for example, but also other sports competitions. So leveraging that brand to be able to increase or promote, enhance our international reputation. That's another key goal of this particular initiative. Associated with those 2 points is to improve the representation of Australia on international sporting bodies and associations. So that could be international or regional associations. The more involvement that Australian leaders can play in these organisations, the more in which we can help to promote Australian values and project our image globally. So that's another key point. And finally, we're also looking to help these sports leaders to share knowledge, expertise and success across sports diplomacy, across governments and within the sports industry. So we know, for example, that in sports, it's often not just a question of the athlete themselves, but also it's a whole team of people working together, working behind that athlete that enables them to be successful. So that includes people, things like trainers, nutritionists, coaches, psychologists. There's often a whole group of people behind that athlete, and then those people are associated with other businesses as well. So it incorporates many different aspects. We often on TV or whatever, you might only see the athlete performing, but there's many, many people behind that performance, and it's actually a team of people who are working to bring that together. So Australia has very good expertise in this area, developing professional athletes. We have very good sporting facilities, the Australian Institute of Sport, for example, the Australian Sports Commission, to develop and train elite athletes. So being able to share that knowledge and expertise with other partners around the world is another key objective of this program. As I said, our neighbouring countries are very important to Australia, and we think that sports and sports diplomacy is a good way in which we can help strengthen our bonds of friendship with our neighbours, specifically with the Pacific, but this also extends to Southeast Asia and Asia more generally. So that's a way. What we're looking for is to help develop pathways for elite Pacific athletes and teams to come to Australia or to participate in international sporting competitions. And that might involve these athletes coming to Australia to train or to compete. I mentioned before, although it wasn't Pacific, I mentioned before that I was involved in helping the Japanese Olympic cycling team come to Australia. They went to Victoria and Tasmania to train. And being exposed to some of our training networks in the Australian Institute of Sport. Another way in which we can help promote these linkages with our neighbours is through developing pathways for what we call Australian sports to increase their profile in the Pacific. So you may have seen before, I had a short video about Australian football. So that's a particular Australian sporting code, and that's become very popular in Pacific nations. It's also gaining popularity in places like India, and also there are a few games that they put on in China as well. So trying to promote these particular Australian sports is a way to improve people's understanding of Australia as well. And then finally, we're also looking to try to find opportunities to strengthen our partnerships in diplomacy and economic relationships through the vehicle of sport in the Indo-Pacific region. So as I said before, sport provides an opportunity not only for the athletes, but also for many of the people who are behind the athlete, and they could be working in different businesses. And often it's an opportunity for these people to collaborate with their partners in other countries. So it could be in terms of coaches, training, nutrition, sports medicine. I'm sure you're very familiar with many of these different aspects of developing elite athletes, and many of these particular professions have business opportunities which are strengthened through sports diplomacy. So the third point of our diplomatic sports strategy is to maximize trade, tourism, and investment opportunities. So once again, this is drawing back to the point I was making earlier, that sports is increasingly involving more aspects of trade, tourism, and investment. This is particularly the case with things like the Olympic Games, but also extends to other major sporting events, including things like soccer World Cups or many, many international competitions. The Rugby World Cup is another example. In all of these cases, there are many, many trade and investment opportunities, but also tourism. You may have seen from the video that I showed at the start of the presentation, how through cycling we can help promote cycle tourism, or what's called ecotourism. That's another example of the ways in which sports and sports diplomacy can help promote tourism. Okay, so we can do the same thing to showcase Australia's capability in sports governments, our high performance technology, and other areas in key global markets, and increasingly that's being the case with Asia. We're also looking to promote Australia as a host country for a number of international sporting events. So Australia has hosted the Olympic Games twice, in Melbourne and more recently in Sydney. But there are many, many other sporting events, things like the Commonwealth Games, or other types of World Cups, where we can encourage or promote Australia to be the host country. And once again, that involves a lot of trade and investment opportunities. So this is a way in which sports and sports promotion, sports diplomacy has a number of flow-on economic effects. Increasingly, sports is becoming a global business. So we need to be conscious of the different ways in which sports and sports activities can help promote business, promote investment. And then finally is using high-profile sporting personalities to promote Australia. So you saw in some of the videos that I was showing earlier, we had a number of female footballers in Nauru. So they're once again, they're serving as ambassadors for Australia, promoting Australia, promoting the image of Australia, and also encouraging people to go to Australia. So it has a number of important flow-on effects that these high-profile athletes can play as leaders, not only in their sport, but also in the broader community. I'd then like to draw on the next point, the next sort of focus of our sports strategy, which is very much to strengthen the communities in the Pacific, Indo-Pacific and beyond. So I've tried to draw a number of examples during my presentation of the ways in which sports can be used to help promote leadership, but also encourage participation of women and girls in sport. Sport is an important vehicle through which we can help to empower women. So that's one key aspect. Sports is important in terms of helping to empower those with disabilities and encouraging healthy lifestyles. As you may have seen before, the cases in Samoa and Tonga of people with diabetes. Just being encouraged to engage in sports in their daily lives helps to improve their health, helps them to combat non-communicable diseases, and helps strengthen the community more generally. We're also looking to use our good sporting governance policies to build safe, fair and accessible sport. So as you may have seen in some of the videos, particularly the ones talking about the Olympic Refuge Foundation, for many people, they actually don't have somewhere safe to play sport. So setting up a basketball field or a football field where they know there's like a safe haven for them to engage in sport is actually a key way that we can help build a safe environment for them and make things more accessible for many people who don't have opportunities to ordinarily to engage in sport. And all of this is very much geared towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's part of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And we think that sports can play a key role in raising people's awareness about these particular goals, and helping sport can play a key part, can contribute to developing towards these goals. So that's what I'm particularly focusing on: social cohesion, healthy lifestyles and gender equality. So just coming to the conclusion of my presentation today, I wanted to briefly point out that what we understand by sports diplomacy is all about very much enhancing our international engagement through sport. So it's important for us to know how we can measure what are our goals when we're trying to do this, how we're trying to enhance our international engagement. So I've set out here a few different goals or objectives that we can use to indicate, to measure our success. So one of those might be seeing more Australians on international sporting bodies and associations. So as I mentioned before, the more Australians that we do have on these international organisations, the more they can help to represent Australian values and promote our image, our brand and our identity. We're also looking to hope to have more Australian athletes and teams enhancing their international profile, so having more opportunities to compete in more regions around the world, in more competitions. But not only Australian athletes, we're also looking for international teams to be able to participate in Australian sporting competitions. So one of the recent projects has been for teams from the Pacific, for example, Papua New Guinea, competing in the Australian Rugby League competition. So we're having Pacific Island nations actually participating, competing in Australian sporting competitions. Another goal that we can look at is for having more Pacific and other athletes coming to Australia to receive high performance training. So I mentioned before that we have the Australian Institute of Sport has many highly esteemed programs for elite athletes, and increasingly we're encouraging overseas athletes to come and utilise these facilities. Many of these athletes are then going back to their home countries and spreading the good word about Australia. I can give an example I know from my own experience of track cycling. We had a Malaysian athlete who came to Australia, and he did his study in Australia and trained in Australia, and then went back to Malaysia, and he used the links that he built in Australia, including his coach who went back with him to help build the Malaysian track cycling team. And he's actually performed very, very well. This particular athlete, he's a track cyclist from Malaysia, and he's been trained and educated in Australia. So it's a great way in which, an example that we can show the ways in which we've collaborated through sports to promote international relations. A few final points which I mentioned here is we're very much focused on encouraging women and girls to participate in sports, particularly in the Pacific. And I mentioned that because often they face heavy discrimination against participating in sports in these countries. But it's not only in these countries, we're looking beyond the Pacific. Across the world, generally, having more women and girls participating in sport is good not only for empowering women generally, but also for improving the image of sport. It's fantastic to see recently things like traditional male-dominated sports in Australia, such as Australian football. Now they're attracting more and more women, and the Women's League is now being televised regularly. So they're creating many great role models for young girls. One of the associated points that we're looking for is to hopefully to see more athletes promoting not only gender equality, but also disability inclusion and healthy lifestyles. So sports is once again a great way in which people who face, people with disabilities who often face discrimination, they can often, through sport, they can develop their self-confidence, and many of them can help overcome a lot of the discrimination that they face in their daily lives through sport, where they can very much gives them an opportunity to develop self-esteem and confidence. And also healthy lifestyles. As I said before, sport plays an important role not only through competition but also improving people's health. Just getting out, getting active is a great way to combat many of the health issues facing people in countries such as Tonga and Samoa, as I mentioned before. And then finally, I think one of the other sort of goals that we can use to measure the success of our sporting diplomacy is for sporting organisations to create safe, fair and accessible sporting environments. So we often take for granted that you can go down the street and there's a basketball court, or you can go running in the park without any problems here in Taiwan. But in many countries, particularly young children, don't have the opportunity to do this. They're often surrounded by civil war or strife or violence. Violence is a big issue, and combating that through sport is a great way to overcome many of these problems as well. So sport can play an important role in all of these aspects. So these are just some of the goals or the measures that I think we can use to assess the success of our sports diplomacy initiatives. So that's where I'd sort of like to finish up today for my presentation. As I said, it's been a fantastic opportunity to be able to present Australia and Australia's sports diplomacy strategy, and I hope that I've helped you to understand a bit better what we mean when we talk about sports diplomacy and how it can be used to help build communication and friendship between countries across the world. Thank you.
Hello, Paul, and all the participants. This is Lisa from Chinese Taipei Olympic Committee. Thank you very much, Paul, for your very clear and detailed explanation of the sports diplomacy of Australia government. And on behalf of the Olympic Committee, I would like to appreciate your support in our International Sports Affairs training course.
Thank you. It was a great honour to be invited and to participate in this great initiative by Chinese Taipei Olympic Committee. I feel very fortunate, and I'm glad that I could share my views and talk about sports diplomacy and how we can use sport to promote cooperation between Australia and Taiwan.
And I would also like to share with our participants that the Olympic Committee actually, we have a very good connection with the Australian office recently. Our advisor, Dr. Sun Li-Chun, has been to your office to deliver an overview of the Olympic movement. And also recently, we have formed a joint Dragon Boat team, which is called Olympic Friendship. And this team is actually going to attend the upcoming Dragon Boat race. And I know you are one of the team members, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's my first time to participate in a dragon boat race, but I'm feel very lucky to be invited to be on the Chinese Taipei Olympic team.
Yeah.
Feel very fortunate. I think my rowing skills, my paddling skills are not quite there yet. We've still got a week to go. Hopefully I can improve and don't cause too much trouble in the team.
But I think this demonstrates how sport can unite people in a very quick and very natural way.
Yeah, I think it's a great example because particularly on a dragon boat team, it involves a lot of people working together, and cooperation is the key in dragon boat racing. You have to make sure that you're in rhythm with the rest of the people and understand and cooperate with them. So it's a good sort of metaphor for sports cooperation and sports diplomacy more generally.
Right. And we are excited to see the result next week.
Yeah. I don't know how the result will go, but it's been fun. So I enjoy that very much. Thank you.
And back to the presentation that you've delivered. I think Australian government is very forward-looking. From my knowledge, I don't think every nation would have their sport diplomacy. I don't think each nation puts sport as the central pillar in their foreign policy. But you have your strategy 2030, and also you have developed the sports diplomacy guidelines. So I'm wondering, can you share with us some of the process in the formation of the sports diplomacy? I think maybe this could also give some references to our own government in Taiwan. And I'm also curious, in the consultation process, how do you cooperate with your national sports federations and the Australian Olympic Committee when you practice the sports diplomacy?
Yeah, no, it's thank you, Lisa. It's an excellent question. In Australia, we very highly value sports and the contribution that sports plays to Australia's relations with internationally. So we were one of the first countries in the world to develop a sports diplomacy strategy back in 2015. And I introduced a few examples. The actual diplomacy strategy that we have extends to 2030. So it's a very long-term vision. I think that's probably a big difference with many other countries, is that we've tried to harness the power that sports has to strengthen our international profile and promote Australia's image more broadly, and develop bonds of friendship with other countries. So that's why I think in developing our strategy going back, as I said, like about 2015, rather than having a number of different ad hoc initiatives, we thought that it could benefit from having a more combined long-term strategy. And so then within that strategy, we developed a number of different initiatives. And many of these were developed in collaboration or in coordination with sporting organisations, the Australian Olympic Committee, to make sure that all our goals were focused and that we were working together to promote the same objectives. So that's been developed with very close collaboration with the Australian Sports Commission, which is the peak sporting body in Australia, but also depending upon the sports involved. So, for example, the case with Australian rules football was developed, the case of those girls playing in Nauru. That was very much done with the help and collaboration of the Australian Football League. So depends on the type of sport being promoted, but to develop the entire strategy, it's very much about getting all of the stakeholders on board and developing a common vision and a long-term vision. I think that's how we'd like to sort of distinguish Australia's approach to sports and sports diplomacy more generally, is to have particular goals and visions and strategy that we're working towards, rather than just having a number of activities which promote sports.
Right. And thank you for, in your presentation, you delivered about the Olympic Refugee Team and also the Olympic Refugee Foundation, which the IOC is now doing. I think it is very important regarding the refugee issue, because it is an example of sports for all, which means everyone has the right to do sport. And this fundamental principle is written in the Olympic Charter. And also, it also demonstrates what humanitarian aspect can have for the sport field. So I think that's one of the very important elements which I saw from your presentation.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it's a fantastic initiative by the International Olympic Committee. And I think one of the other benefits is, apart from the many that you just mentioned, is that it also brings the plight of refugees to the international audience. Helps people to understand that many children, for example, they actually don't have like a soccer field where they can play safely. So helping to improve people's understanding of the plight of refugees more generally through sport. So it has many great benefits, and it's great to see these types of initiatives being supported by the international Olympic movement.
Right. Sport may not be the solution, of course, but it can draw the attention of the international community for such a very prominent international issue. And I actually worked before in Taiwan Red Cross, and I've been to the refugee camp in Jordan. That's a Syrian refugee camp. And I personally saw how sport can play a vital role in the refugee camp, in the crowded area, and you really need a safe place. And you need young people, they need somewhere to learn and to play. So I think for the sport community, there are many things that we can contribute other than sport itself.
Yeah, no, that's great, and it's very interesting to hear that you have that experience in Jordan, and of course the plight of Syrian refugees is something that we've all come to learn more about, and understanding that better through sport is another great example of how sports diplomacy can play such an important role.
Right. And what do you think that sport can play, the role the sport can have between Australia and Taiwan relationship?
Okay, that is an excellent question. So, as I said, I think there's two aspects. So one aspect is direct collaboration. And that could be, for example, as I mentioned, Australian athletes coming to train or participate in Taiwan. So we had a couple of Australian teams participating in some cycling races earlier this year. That was one example. Hopefully we can get more Taiwanese athletes going to Australia to train and to compete. So that sort of direct collaboration is one excellent example. But I also think that there is a lot of potential for Taiwan and Australia to collaborate to promote sports in the Pacific.
Right.
So I know that the Pacific region is also very important to our Taiwanese friends. And so working together on a number of sporting initiatives in the Pacific might be a great way to strengthen both Australia-Taiwan relations, but also relations between Taiwan, Australia, and the Pacific region more generally. I think that particular area, as in Australia's sports diplomacy to date, we've had a particular focus on the Pacific, and that's because it's a region where our relationship with our neighbours is very important, but it's also because we think that it's a region where we can deliver the most benefit from these types of programs. So it can be hard to achieve outcomes for particular sports diplomacy initiatives, but in the Pacific it means because they face a number of socio-economic issues, sports can be a way to help address these problems. So we can deliver a lot of benefits. You get a lot of value for programs in places like the Pacific.
Right. It is really an area that maybe Olympic Committee and also our government with the Australian office, we can explore the opportunities together.
Yeah, I think I would very much like to, in the time that I am here in Taiwan, I think it's a great area to cooperate together with the Taiwanese government and the Australian government to promote sports and sports diplomacy in the Pacific region. Yeah.
Right. And for this course, our participants come from different national sports federations, government offices, and some of them are athletes, coaches, or even a general public. Any suggestions that you give them if they are interested in sports, diplomatic, or international sports affairs? Do you have any suggestions for our participants?
Yeah, well, I think what I have learned is that, as I said, sport is a great vehicle to build friendships, to build partnerships. The example of the Dragon Boat team is just one example. But I think if you approach this type of cooperation more broadly, you can see how that sort of cooperation on a team through a particular type of sport can then be used to build broader cooperation. And it could be from between organizations or community groups, and then it can actually extend to government cooperation. So often when we're talking about sports diplomacy, we're actually talking about people-to-people links. So building friendships through sport, and then using those friendships, building on those friendships to develop greater cooperation at the broader level.
Okay. And my last question, how do you enjoy the most about living and working in Taiwan?
Oh, that's a great question, and it's very hard to answer because there are so many great things about living and working in Taiwan. As I said, I've been working here for about 6 months, but I've found that Taiwan, even though it's quite a small island, it's very, very diverse. And the best thing about Taiwan are the people. Everybody is incredibly friendly and helpful, and I feel very safe here. So that's probably the underwriting thing. And it's encouraged me to be able to do a lot of traveling around Taiwan, visiting lots of different areas. And the lifestyle here is fantastic. I can't think of any other place in Asia where the capital city is surrounded by such beautiful nature. It's very easy to go hiking, go to the mountains or go to the beach. So everything is very convenient in Taiwan. It's amazing. And as I mentioned, for such a small island, it's so diverse. So, it has amazing mountains, very high mountains for hiking, and lots of things like exploring rivers and things like this, but also great beaches. There's surfing, great diving, many different things we can enjoy in such a very small area. So for the next 3 to 4 years, I hope I have many opportunities to travel around the rest of Taiwan, meet lots of different people, and try and learn more about this such a beautiful place. I can understand why it was called the Beautiful Island.
Yeah, small but beautiful island.
Yeah.
Right, and you both are a professional athlete and also a diplomat. To me, it is a very unique combination. And so still anything you want to say to our audience, to our participants? Maybe I think you can be an athlete, you can be a sport professional, but you can also have another very different career.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question, and we often talk about a work-life balance, having a balance in your working career. But I also think that sport actually plays a very important role in promoting a healthy lifestyle, and sport can really help your career. Like I talked during the presentation, I talked about the ways in which sport can help develop values such as leadership, decision-making, teamwork, cooperation. All of these things actually are very useful in your professional career. So lots of people talk about having to do a trade-off between sports and their professional career, but I actually think that they complement one another. So, of course, if you're a professional athlete, many athletes don't have opportunity to pursue sports, things outside their sports. They're entirely focused on their sport. But I'd encourage them to think about their future careers as well. I think that's an important point for all athletes. Is many of their careers, it's limited to the amount of time you can remain at the top level. And so during that time, not to neglect your studies or to continue to think about your life after sports. It may mean that you're actually working in that particular sport. You might become like a trainer or a coach, nutritionist or something like that. But also think about not neglecting your studies when I know in Australia, often many professional athletes get to a point where they're choosing between becoming a full-time athlete and going to university. And in Australia, in our sports programs, we encourage these athletes to continue studying because we want them to not only have a professional career, but after they've finished their sporting career to be able to move into another career. So yeah, that sort of care for athletes after their peak sort of sporting career is finished is a key part of our sort of future sporting strategy. We're increasingly realizing that many high performance athletes are very much just focused on getting like a gold medal, for example. And then they don't know what to do. If they do get a gold medal and they become like a national hero, but then like 5 years after, 10 years after, what are they going to do? So helping these people to develop a number of skills and to develop like a healthy balance in their lives is also important. So I don't think that sports and career are sort of in conflict with one another. I think they can and should be encouraged to work together. Yeah.
Right. Oh, thank you very much, Paul, for your presentation and for this discussion. And we really hope through sport we can facilitate mutual understanding and international cooperation and also unite people together. I think this is even more important in a world of uncertainty, especially after COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time today. It was a great pleasure and honor.
Thank you.